Hello and welcome to the RestoreLiberty.us podcast. Our special guest today is Marcell Strbich, running for Secretary of State here in Ohio.
That's right. We're taking on making waves, and we're going to be giving the people a choice.
So we like to go after the people that are a little bit off the beaten path. He's not a politician, 20-year Air Force, right?
20 years Air Force Intel officer, and in Ohio by way of marriage and by choice.
Okay, excellent. Unfortunately, you grew up in Chicago, right?
Right. Don't hold it against me. I'm a refugee, but knowing how they do business over there, that's part of my motivation to make sure it never happens here in Ohio.
Yeah, if you know what the enemy's doing.
That's right. You got to be close. What do they say? Keep your friends
Keep
close.
friends closer, your enemies closer. So we're going to try and go through some of the reasons Marcell's running and what you can expect. So let's get a little bit of the background. So you were in the Air Force, retired as a lieutenant colonel?
Yeah, retired as a lieutenant colonel. I didn't have any intention to run for politics. I started out in the war on terror. I was given assignments right off from the bat. After 9/11, I entered the military because I wanted to do something about the problems that we saw the threats come into our country and threaten us. And so they sent me to Iraq. And there I did a lot of missions supporting ground forces, making sure that people came home alive back to Ohio and going after enemy forces. And later I would get more assignments and I'd go to Afghanistan. I'd embed with the Army Rangers. I even went to the Horn of Africa, trained the Kenyan Defense Forces
Oh,
against
wow.
Somalia, yeah, at the time. And still, I guess this is where a lot of our resources are headed into, right? From Ohio, as we're learning. But I was up against Al-Shabaab, the militant Al-Qaeda militant group in Somalia.
So dealing with Democrats is not going to be as difficult as dealing with.
No. Sometimes your own are the hardest to deal with, as we all know, right? The ones closest to us. But that whole experience of both tactical, operational, strategic experience in peacetime and wartime gave me a lot of organizational leadership experience. Almost went into the FBI, and then I met my wife at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton. And then I said to myself, okay, so you want to be a father, a husband, or you want to be a G-man? Well, I made the best choice because Jim Comey was running the FBI, and that would have been a disaster knowing the way that he was running things. And so I decided to stay in Ohio. We got married, and we're happily married. We have 2 6 and 8-year-old.
Okay, young ones.
Young ones, yeah. And so when we got to COVID, this is really to answer the question. We got to COVID, I realized that our country is on the wrong track if we can take away our liberties and impose a will upon every one of us. The election of 2020 was absolutely corrupted through excessive mail-in ballots that were
Right.
shipped out with drop boxes and an assortment of really shady procedures across the country. People lost confidence in elections, and people really wanted to voice their views and opinions about it, but they were being shut down and censored. In the military overnight, those of us who fought the war on terror, who were labeled heroes, became suddenly potential domestic extremists
Right.
because we held strong views in faith, family, religion, and constitution. And so there was a COVID mandate that was thrown in August of 2021 with the intention to push, I think, a lot of those type of folks out, to make you choose between your informed conscience and consent, along practice and medical practice. And so what happened is I took a stand. I pushed up against that. I refused to accept what were the lies in the implementation approach, which was constantly changing to take away people's religious accommodation. And it probably cost me my advancement in the military to become a colonel
Right.
and general officer. But I didn't want to serve in an institution at the time that didn't respect the basic liberties. That
Well,
I
here
was
in
fighting.
Ohio, they shut down the churches but left the abortion clinics and bars open. It's like this is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
So I resolved that whatever was exactly. I resolved whatever happens after that. I was going to get out. I was going to go back to Ohio. Kind of, I thought I'd be a civilian. I'd work and not have to deal with the deployments and all the things that I've been through. And I got back here and I said, okay, well, let's see what's going on in the local politics in Montgomery County. So they had a commissioner's race. A Republican won that night on election night and was told so. But a few days later, hundreds and not thousands of ballots started to come in through mail-in ballot.
Magically appeared.
Right. And so the lead at the end of the day, it took 20 days to count this election. And I realized this is the type of issue that appeared in Georgia. It's all in all likelihood happening wherever there's not enough public oversight, transparency, or accountability. And of course, the election judges and the parties count the votes.
Right.
People are not involved in any step of the process. At that point, I realized, you know what? This was what started the whole problem with the medical freedom and the censorship. It all started with the scam of an election. And I said to myself, if it can happen in Montgomery County, it can happen anywhere. So I started to get even more actively involved. I started to study Ohio's election codes, laws, procedures. I did that on my own time. I put my kids to bed at night, midnight. I'd go up there, I'd read it. Started meeting people in Columbus who were considered statewide advocates, constituent advocates,
Right.
activists, whatever you want to call those folks. And I realized that I worked at the Pentagon. I worked with the vice chairman, and I oversaw a $25 billion acquisition and technology portfolio. I could fix this. I could fix the issues of information systems that don't talk to one another. This is what happens. The Board of Elections don't have access to identity, residency, and citizenship information.
And they
They
don't
don't
cross-check
they don't
anything.
cross-check it. Then this is the same problem we're having with the Somali fraud. You have individual departments that have a part of the puzzle, but they don't all see the same, and they don't combine and coordinate, cross-coordinate, cross agency to do that. And I had experience doing that because we had worked with intel agencies, the FBI, DOJ, on a number of issues from terrorism to tech transfer. So all of these experiences and skills that I didn't know, I was going to be using post-military, I chose not to become a, you know, 300,000 a year earner as a defense contractor. I wanted to give back to this country and to the state of Ohio because we've got to protect and fortify Ohio so that we don't become a Michigan. We don't become some of these other basket
Right.
cases.
Or worst case, California, where you aren't even allowed to ask for an ID now.
Yeah, and so this is what I learned along the way. As I was presenting legislation, Ohio's not using a voter ID for mail-in ballots. And so you have third-party groups in Ohio, and this came out last year in Hamilton County. They're able to pay people money to go canvass people, get registered, to control the registration and the ballots and the chain of custody of that. It's a huge liability, and there's really no enforcement on what's going to happen to them if they defraud, which they did in a number of ways in Hamilton County. So if you see a sliver of it, it's much more that exists.
Right.
And what I realize is the entire enterprise, I studied it from registration to vote casting, vote counting, and auditing. If you don't have a means to detect it, which is the case, then you can't say that it doesn't exist. And that's where the Republicans get really squishy because when they get called election denier and disenfranchiser, all they need to do is come back and say, we don't have a means to detect it. So we need to disprove fraud. It's not a question of proving fraud in the system. It exists in the system. It's a question of disproving that your current procedures, your current laws prevent the fraud in the first place.
Excellent. So you were drawn to the election thing because of what you saw in Montgomery County. Clearly, it's happening everywhere. The most recent election here in Hamilton County, where the mayor's race was decided 80-20 on a candidate that was fairly strong for the Republican side, and there's just no way it was really 80-20. So the elections are a key part of restoring liberty. If you can't get the trust in the elections and the belief that when you vote, your vote's going to count for the person you actually cast it for, everything else is downhill from that. You can't have anything if you don't believe the vote.
I would agree with you. And I think that, just prior to the November 2024 election, Rasmussen did a poll. 6 out of 10 Americans had questions as to whether that election we just ran was going to be honest, fair. And so that's a crisis because that signals that a lot of people do not want to go out and vote at all because they say, what's the point of me voting? It's already decided. And so if you look at Ohio politics, the only way you could ever really run for state office like I'm doing is you have to work your way up either through local or the legislature, then they muck you up, and then you're in a position where, you no longer are beholden, you're tied to a system of favors for endorsements.
Favors for endorsements. That's a
Favors
great way of wording it.
Yeah, and so they're starting to so then you get to the executive level, and then your qualifications are not, am I the best auditor? Am I the best secretary of state? Am I the best treasurer? Your qualifications are, have you made sure that you didn't injure the reputation of or compromise somebody else's career? So you kind of fail up, right? And or you find a way to stay in the system long enough, not tarnish, to just rotate seats, which is what was happening. And so I had to ask myself a fundamental question. George, I had gone to the legislature 3 times, put 2 different bills out there to enhance eligibility verification, which is where we're weakest in Ohio, qualifying people on the front end before we even give them access to a ballot. We suck at that. We have not had a good process. We have an honor system. It's like that in other states, but we have means to do something with the right people and the right political will. So you look at that issue, you look at the lack of voter ID, you look at the third party. We're susceptible to multiple forms of voter registration and or mail-in ballot fraud. And then I said, okay, if the legislature won't do it, the Secretary of State won't do it, won't the State Central Committee do it? So I saw that President Trump got elected. He asked the states to take on this same day in-person voting, paper ballots, which means not the paper coming out of a computerized voting system, the receipt. It means the pen and paper, right? The watermark or the pen and paper. And he wanted upfront proof of citizenship verification. All these things we had prior to 2000 before all these people contested, Democrat or Republican, our elections, and before all this distrust. As soon as it went into a computerized way, then people started to not trust it for good measure. Because I can tell you as a professional, everything that involves information systems and software can be totally compromised. It's not even about the internet. You know this, right?
I've been a white hat. I've hacked top secret computers before, and hacking a voting machine, you give me an hour and a half in it and I'll get in.
I'll give you
It's
one
not that
better.
tough.
Alex Halderman, a computer scientist, by no means some kind of a partisan, showed in a courtroom that he can take a pen and he can push a button on the back of a voting machine, restart its operating software, and basically tell it what functions he wants to move votes on it. So, folks, there's so many ways to do
So
it.
they actually have a back door built in.
They do, and all of these things have, for reasons of convenience or for reasons of remote access, you don't even need to be connected to the internet. And the way that whole phrase of connectivity to the internet is used, it's just, to me, it's dishonest. So I really want a system in Ohio that's same day in person voting. We should have an opportunity for people who cannot get to the polling location because they're not in the precinct. Let's say their mobility restricted because of health
So
or
go
other
back to the
qualified.
1980s,
Right.
1990s.
I mean, even 1998, right? You could get it done. Now, some people say, I don't want to wait in line. Well, you address that through manpower. You address that through polling locations. You right size your precincts and your polling locations so that you never get to that point. And you still keep a qualified, justifiable reason to vote by mail and absentee. And in Ohio, we have 28 days, which is an extraordinary amount of time. People just don't want election
It
season
allows them
anymore.
to bust the votes in.
Right, and it takes time. So, like, the whole time, the parties are watching who got what votes, so you know that their third-party groups are, so then they know how to surge that. Now, in Ohio, we just passed a law that cuts off on election day any other additional ballots that come in by mail. They call it the grace period. It's not gonna be the case anymore, George.
Good.
However, you're still gonna have 28 days for third-party groups to figure out the weaknesses, and there's plenty of weaknesses I discovered.
So I think on the area of election integrity, I don't know that I've encountered someone with your experience and drive to get that fixed. That's a clear one. I want to touch a little bit on something you mentioned just a second there, was the rotating chairs up in Columbus. I don't know how many people pay attention because most people have never heard the name of your opponent. They just know that for the last 4 terms, he's just rotating between different spots in Columbus. And every one of the group that's up there now has been there at least 2 different jobs. So just the fact that, hey, I used to be attorney general and this year I'm going to run for auditor and next year I'm going to run for secretary of state, that doesn't mean you're qualified. Like you said, it just means you're part of the party inside and you're going to play musical chairs until it's your turn to become governor or get thrown out.
And what are we getting out of this arrangement in Ohio? Like, we see very little results.
Ineptitude.
Right. And so these positions do require specific skill sets. You want to be an auditor? It would be great to have some accounting or financial background, right? Or same thing with treasurer or the secretary of state. Have you worked with systems, information systems? You understand? So the skill sets of a person who's been in elected office too long, they degrade like anybody else's.
If
So
they ever had him at all. So
if they
many,
ever
I
had
mean, look at
yeah.
Mike DeWine. The guy's never had a real job. He's never signed the front of a payroll check. That's why I like people like Bernie Moreno. The guy's never had a political job before, but
Correct.
he signed a lot of front of checks. I mean, he knows how to balance a book and knows what it means to do hard work. Hard work is not showing up in Columbus 4 days a week and voting on garbage. It's going out and working.
Yes.
And I think this whole thing you're running against now is you're not part of those musical chairs. So how do you look at your chances of going against the machine? I mean, literally, you're running against the GOP machine here in Ohio.
Yeah, the more that people hear me, the more they want to vote for me, right? Because I want the job to do the job, and they just want a job. It's a big difference because what that's saying is they'll take anything as long as they can stay in the system and avoid term limits. So what are they really there for? Status quo. They're not making those changes that are fundamental.
And they're not going to rock the boat.
They won't, because if they do, they go on record. And all of them, I noticed this too. They're all running for their next job while they already have their current job. So really, they come out there and they say these things. I've noticed as I've gone through this race for 6 months, I've been all over the state. I've got a really strong voter engagement strategy. I'm building the largest field army of volunteers. I'm going to put that to use for the general ticket when we get there in November, if you elect me May 5th, 2026. But the point is, you notice they don't take the liberty to do any of those things, right? They go to the donor set, donors give them this, and they just run on that, and they run on the hope that the party's going to continue to get their back. And we're breaking that mold. We just secured big endorsements, and we have serious momentum in this race. They know it is a competitive race, and we may have already reached the point where we're going to win it.
Well, the fact that you got the Butler County endorsement, that was huge. I'm hoping you can get Warren as well. Here in Hamilton County, we don't do endorsements, and if we did, there's no way you're going to break the trust downtown here. But so that's extremely encouraging that you're able to get that done with a grassroots campaign. And so let's talk about that a little bit. You don't have the GOP backing. You're having to work for outside of the normal donor set to get your donors. We'll post the information on Marcel's, if you want to donate, how to do that. But you also need the arms and legs, because I really think the primaries are won and lost by the grassroots. That's what Restore Liberty can help you with. What do you need there? What's your main wants? What is it we can do to help you?
Thanks for bringing it up. Yes, we need to get out the vote operation. Early voting starts April 7th. The actual election day is May 5th. So that's going to happen within 90 to 100 days. And we need people to start to identify as county leads, which fortunately we have dozens of them so far. So if you're interested, you can go to our website at Strbich, Strbich, spelled out for Ohio.com. There's a volunteer button, there's a donate button. That would be a great way to identify yourself. We're also on X and Facebook. We have the largest social media following combined of all of the candidate, this in our case, the insider candidate. And you can go there and you can amplify our message. You can push it out, let people see our name. You know, the interesting thing is the counterpoint to my running in this race as well. You're running against someone with name ID for 16 years. Well, we ran an internal poll. We sent a survey out. Hopefully, Restore Liberty helps us with this too. But we sent a survey out asking people, do you know who Robert Sprague is? Do you know Marcel Strbich? And who would you vote for? 65% they would vote for me, 5% for the other candidate. And then with regards to the name ID, 69% knew me, only 40% knew him.
Really? That's amazing.
That is a coup, right? Like, how does that happen? How do you not get known after being, in these
Up in
offices?
Columbus for
Up in
16
Columbus.
years.
And that is because you wait for every issue to transpire before you then raise your hand and see where things go. So we don't need go along to get along politics in the Republican Party. We can't continue to incrementally move forward as a state. There's an opportunity in 2026. We're going to completely reset the playing field here. The Secretary of State race is the grassroots Trump Republican-like race that people can lash onto, and it will drive out, I say this all the time, disaffected voters. So if you're a voter and you say, what's the point of voting for these Republicans? They're just going to go out, just going to do this thing. I've demonstrated over time that I'm willing to challenge any and all things on the basis of issues, on the basis of policy. And I clearly have a deep understanding of it because I've been the most prepared based on my advocacy for this.
Well, and if your issue is trusting the vote in the first place, well, this is your one chance to actually make your voice heard and say, listen, we're not going to go with the status quo. We're going to go with somebody that's actually serious about fixing the problem. I think you've shown that. I encourage our listeners, please go to his webpage, explore, do your due diligence. I think you'll be impressed. Let's talk a little bit about the other issues. I noticed on your website you talk about Second Amendment, right to life.
Yeah.
Where is your background in that? And I know not much of that falls under the purview of the Secretary of State, but it's nice to know somebody's character. So what would you say on those issues?
I grew up in a first generation American family. My parents were from Europe, practicing Catholics. So we're deep seated in a family faith and tradition. That part of Europe, Croatia, is a very traditional part of Europe. It's not one that's taken in all these other populations around the world. It's kind of similar to Polish. If you know that background or ethnicity, everybody came to the United States to work for the opportunity and to escape the persecution that Europe had after World War II and communism, that kind of thing. So I grew up in really humble origin, 1,200 square foot home. I didn't have an opportunity to hunt a lot growing up in the city, but I entered the profession of arms, and I'm very familiar with firearms. And we delivered a lot of kinetic firepower over the course of 10 years in Afghanistan, more than I could possibly ever convey to this audience in terms of what I've seen in the wars. So for me, I'm very strong on the 2A amendment. It's not negotiable. I would never ever seek or advocate for any restrictions on it. I'm an NRA lifetime member. And so from my perspective or standpoint, I'm friendly on that position. From a life standpoint, life is sacred at all phases of life. It begins at human conception, and that's what's taught in Catholic teaching. And that's one thing that the Catholic Church does actually talk about politically, is that they're strong on that. I wish they were more
Right.
open and vocal about it, but sometimes they play too much politics too, especially with immigration and all that stuff. But with respect to that, I mean, that's why I have Cleveland Right to Life's endorsement. That's why I have the Ohio Value Voters endorsement. That's why, a lot of different groups, Right to Life Action or Cincinnati Right to Life or Warren County Right to Life, those people are supporting a lot of those. People are supporting this candidacy to the extent that, people have relationships too with my opponent. And so that makes things more complicated, but that's not an issue in terms of very traditional conservative viewpoints and beliefs that I believe underpin the entire society.
Right. So if you can't trust where your heart is, you can't
Yeah.
trust where your
I'm a
actions
conscious person. Yeah. And I've always led that way in my life. That's why I fought against the COVID mandate. I knew it was wrong to force people to inject something into their body. The body is the place where
I
everything
thought
else
the whole
comes from.
thing was my body, my choice until COVID hit.
I used to say that too. I used to use that in an alternative argument. Like, didn't you care about it? But instead, people were really induced with fear. And, fear makes you do stupid things, makes you do things
And I
that you
think we saw
regret.
that in spades in COVID. There
Yeah.
was a lot of stupid. Um, What other roles of Secretary of State, other than just election integrity, what other things do you want people to understand that are a part of that office, and what do you bring to that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm the only candidate right now talking about the issues that people care about in Ohio. Like, what are we going to do about this fraud issue? So, for those of you, the Secretary of State plays a pivotal role in forming businesses or registering businesses in the state of Ohio. So, whether you're a legitimate business or you're a shady business that's here to extract money and send it overseas or line your pockets, all of them have to incorporate their business, their limited liability corporation, their LLCs at the Secretary of State's office. The limitation here, though, is the Secretary of State has specific and limited authorities granted by the legislature that states that they cannot reject or excessively review for anything other than incorrect information in the application. So you can't really prevent a business from forming because you can't judge the intent of that business up front. However, with the Secretary of State's position, you can utilize your public integrity division. You can look for suspect activity with those business filings, which could mean excessive or recurring renaming of the businesses, excessive registration of LLCs at a given location. We saw in Ohio a $42 million.
Cross-check the names with the
Right.
addresses.
So what the government has, the problem all governments have, as you know, George, is these bureaucracies, they want their resources and they do what's within their lines. But no one, unless there's a true leader figure in the governor's office, says to these entire groups of agencies, we're forming a cross-coordinated interagency task force of folks. We're going to combine the Attorney General's Medicare Fraud Control Unit, 160 investigators. We're going to bring the Secretary of State's Public Integrity Division, which we just beefed up to look at voter fraud or other mission subsets. We're going to bring the auditor in, who has specialized methods and tools and means to get at that problem. And then the Department of Youth and Children, which is the entity formerly under the Department of Jobs and Family Services, which is a cabinet agency under the governor. All of those agencies need to be working together. Get them into one room. Have the governor give the brief. Come before the people of Ohio. Explain to them this is what our mission is, to identify these fraudulent business activities, to, once we identify them, examine that activity. We'll report back to the people of Ohio in 30 days. We'll let you know what we're doing, how we're going to do it. And then when we identify, we're going to actually do our part to enforce the laws and ensure that the people who did that are criminally charged, in which case, if they were naturalized U.S. citizens, they need to be denaturalized and they need to follow the process set forth by the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security. And the good news is on this, at least the White House understands this because they just formed this entity this week. It was announced by Vice President Vance and that office in the White House is going to work with a special counsel in the Department of Justice that will be dedicated to that. So we need individual states now to plug in with that task force, and we need a multi-state level approach tied back to the upper portion of this in the federal government. And it could be done with the right people, and I'm the right person to lead the Secretary of State's office. Take that on.
Well, and if you're not looking for the next job and you're not worried about alienating all of the powers that be in Columbus, I think you got a much better chance. Well, we really appreciate you coming out. I hope people take the time to go and investigate, take a look at Marcel's background, what he's trying to do. But certainly from an election integrity standpoint, I think the choice is pretty clear there. We haven't had any major change out of the Secretary of State's office for voter ID and for election integrity in a long time. So thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
George. Great time.
Stay in touch. You can learn more at restoreliberty.us. You can reach us via email, info@restoreliberty.us. We're on Facebook. We're on X. Take a listen. Thank you so much.